Great. Well, it's lovely to have an audience here to talk to today. I'm really interested in talking to you today about becoming an ethical researcher. And let me just make sure I've got all of my parts of my presentation sorted out here in front of me. Great. Welcome to this this seminar around becoming an ethical researcher. My name's Elaine Sharplin, Professor Elaine Sharplin, and I'm a very proud member of the Graduate School of Education. I also have the privilege of holding the position of the Chair of the Graduate School of Education Research Committee and the Chair of the Nazarbayev University Institutional Ethics Research Committee. So ethics has become a real passion for me, and my research, which is largely in the field of teacher education and developing the capacity of teacher educators, has really led to an interesting journey to try and extend the knowledge about international contemporary research ethics in Kazakhstan. And as a part of that process, a team that I'm working with, some of whom are online today, lovely to see you, Yildiz and Igor, and I'm not quite sure who else might be there, but we have developed a course, a trilingual course, which I think is the very first course of its type, to enable researchers across Kazakhstan, across Central Asia, post-Soviet republics, to engage in international research. So for me, the foundation of research is ethical approaches. And in order to be able to participate in international collaborations, universities, research institutions across the world, and in order to be able to publish in high quality scholarly journals, research needs to demonstrate that it's consistent with ethical processes and ethical practices. Unfortunately, at the moment, Kazakhstan has the unenviable position of being at the top of countries that are publishing in what we call predatory journals. So this means that people are placing their research in journals which are not well respected, often which require money to be paid in order to be published, and they're not highly esteemed by the international community. So my hope is that through the work I'm doing, the work of the teams at the Graduate School of Education, and through the introduction of all of our research students, that we can significantly enhance the quality of research which is being done in Kazakhstan, and that will enable us to ensure that the important research that is being done in this country can be widely disseminated and widely valued. So, what I'd like to ask is that you will take an active participation in this seminar. It's always very hard doing just a straight delivery. I'm very keen to interact. So I will be posing some questions and asking for your contribution. I want to make sure that everybody is aware that there is a chat function at the bottom of the screen, and I would encourage you to use that chat function in the first instance to introduce yourself, and then later on when I pose some questions, if you can post your ideas up in that chat box. Working on a small screen at home, so I might need some direction, Adana, to questions if I'm missing them because I'm focused on other parts of my screen. So
Sure.
I will just start off by just going to get back to sorry, I can't get to my forward button because I've got so many other things. Here we go. I want to begin by starting with defining some key terms. And this may or may not seem very obvious to you, but I want to begin by asking you what we think of when we think about the word ethics generally, and then what we mean more specifically when we start talking about research in ethics. So I'm wondering if you can post your ideas up to the chat function, please, about that. So any comments? I can't see any chat up there at the moment in terms of what you think those terms might be. No, no participants. You're all very passive today. So the question was, what do you think is meant by the concept of ethics, first of all? And secondly, what you think is meant by the term of research ethics? Okay, in the absence of your chat, I'm going to, great, lovely to see something. Thank you, Asamgul. Yeah, that notion about there are some sort of rules and norms. And sometimes when people think about ethics, they often think about the concept of morality, the things about what's right and wrong to do. But right and wrong is something which varies differently according to your different value sets, your different perhaps religious beliefs. So with the term ethics, it is more about creating a set of perhaps professional rules or a particular code that defines what's appropriate, the best ways to behave and to do things in that field. And so in our case, we're talking today about research ethics. Now, thanks, Elmira, because it's really important that often the first things that people do think about when we talk about ethics and we talk about research ethics, it's what I consider to be a subsection. And so today I'm going to talk about a little bit about that first area about ethical scholarship, which is, you know, the notions about academic integrity and plagiarism. But more commonly, I'm going to talk about the ethics of human subject research. So this is a much more specialized area of ethics, which relates to particularly how we conduct research with human subjects. And all of our students at the Graduate School of Education, our master's students and our PhD students learn how to conduct ethical research with human subjects because we believe it is so important. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that and then give you the opportunity to find out more about how you can become an ethical researcher through enrolment in our programs at the graduate school. And Idana in particular will be able to answer your questions in that way. So, So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about this very common area, and I'm sure a lot of this will be familiar to you. But when people think about the ethics of scholarship, often the first thing they think about is notions of plagiarism, which I think falls under the much broader category of academic integrity or academic honesty. And it's really important that when we are working as scholars, that we honour the ideas of other people that have come before us, that we certainly use and we build on the knowledge that's been built by other scholars, but that we also correctly attribute their work and their effort. So as scholars and as scholars of the future, you will be building intellectual knowledge, and it's important that you have ownership of that intellectual property, and you will want people to respect that by appropriately acknowledging. And in fact, as academics, our careers are built on the fact that others do read our work, they acknowledge our work, and when they cite our work, as scholars. So, and we recognise the ideas of others. Of course, it's always important that we represent knowledge correctly in assessment tasks, so that we are only offering our own work, our own understandings. That is, that we're not using the work of other students, we're not accessing information in a way that's not allowed for the completion of the assessment tasks. Having said that, what we really want at the Graduate School of Education is to encourage people to genuinely engage in the process of learning. And that means that being prepared to take risks, being prepared to make mistakes, actively collaborating with others, but doing all of those things in a trustworthy manner. So sometimes people have a perception that collaboration's not ethical, that collaboration is the same thing as collusion, and that's not the case. So we think you build a community of practice by talking, by sharing ideas, but the basis of that is always trust, and that is that we are acknowledging where ideas come from. So the opposite of this notion of academic integrity is obviously academic misconduct. And probably some of those terms are very familiar to you. The notion about plagiarizing, which is to use someone else's work without the proper acknowledgement that it's come from somebody else. Colluding is, which I've just referred to, is the notion that somehow you are not just collaborating with peers, that you're not just talking and discussing ideas, but that perhaps you are copying each other's work or submitting work that you've obtained from somebody else, which is again a form of cheating. And moving into the area of research, there are issues around people, and sometimes there are some very famous cases of senior and esteemed researchers that have actually fabricated data. That is, that they have made up data rather than presenting authentically, ethically collected data, or they have falsified data. That is, that they have taken the information that they have, they've manipulated it in a particular way in order to try and demonstrate a hypothesis that they want to support. So it might be by only presenting part of the data, or by putting a particular bias on the data which doesn't accurately represent. And then of course, there's the notion that people can obtain success in academia through offering inducements to influence the outcome of their studies or the influence of their publication of their paper. And that's what happens really in some cases with predatory journals. So I've skipped over that really quickly because that's not what I really want to focus on. What I really want to talk to you is moving on to research ethics, or ethics related to doing research with human subjects. So first of all, I want you to understand that when we're talking about research, it's possible to be doing research which is related to the use of existing data. So you might be about doing documentary research, policy analysis, literature reviews. You might be doing secondary analysis of data, in which case all of the issues around scholarly academic integrity are very important in that connection. But for the rest of the session, I want to focus on the ethics of research associated with empirical research, which is collecting new data. So this is often very familiar to people in the field of biomedical research when we look at the testing of, especially in the current context, an enormous amount of work that's going into the development of new vaccines. That vaccination development process is going to involve volunteers, human subjects that are going to have to trial that vaccine. And so in lots of ways, when we talk about the biomedical field, the concept of risk and danger in research ethics is very evident. People can be used as the basis for experiments, and people can very easily be harmed. What people are often less familiar with is the notion of ethics for human subject in the social sciences, so particularly in the field of education, where we're not injecting people with untried substances, we're not doing surgical procedures on people, and yet through our exploratory processes, asking questions through surveys, through interviews, there is opportunities to put people at harm and risk. And so understanding ethical processes in order to minimize harm to human subjects is really a critical part of ethical research. So what do we mean by research? Well, we start off with a question that we want to ask. We have to collect some data to find out what the answer is to that question, and we have to analyze that data. So it's in the process of collecting data from human subjects where the issues about ethics are often most important. So as a researcher, whether you're a student researcher or a faculty researcher, there are lots of responsibilities. Those responsibilities including making sure that the work that you are undertaking is methodologically correct, that is, that you're following due scientific theory and processes, and that your research is ethically designed. So in particular, that means about protecting our participants, working out how we're going to select them so that we're selecting the right participants, and that's protective of those participants, that we enable them to give what's called informed consent, and that we also then manage our data ethically. So I want to put to you a provocation. And again, I'd really invite you to make some comments, please. If I can just get the comments section back up. So on my screen, I've got a scenario there, and I want you to think about, is there any problem with what's being proposed in this scenario? Would this be ethical research? What could be some ethical concerns that are associated with that case? And I'd invite you to type some responses for me in the chat section. Just trying to bring up again. Dana, are you able to see that? Here we go.
Shall I switch on some of the audios, Elaine, or let them just type in the chat box?
Yeah, it might be good if you could do that, please. It's we've got some questions. So thank you to Gulmira. So you think that there's some ethical problems with that, and thanks, Moldia. So there's questions about requiring some consent and assent from the children's parents. There's issues about the privacy and personal data. Yeah, so one of the things is that when we take photos, those photos reveal people's identities. And one of the things that we have to be very protective of is issues around identifiability of people and about anonymity or confidentiality. So if we're taking photos, that's one thing. And if we can do that, taking photos as part of a data collection process can be a really great strategy. There's a lot of research. Anna Cohen-Miller, one of our researchers, does a lot of research using photos as part of the data. However, it's really important that you obtain people's consent in order to use that data before you use it. You cannot collect data without people's consent, and you certainly can't use it, especially photographs that would reveal people's identity, if you are without their consent. All right, so let me get you to think about another one. What do you think about this situation here? There's an information letter given to an institution, it might be a school, it might be a university, about the participation of the school, and stating very clearly that participation will be voluntary. But the director of the school thinks, well, this is a great opportunity for our teachers to get some professional development. And so the director decides that they will nominate people to participate in this research. But some of the teachers are not sure that they really want to participate. So what sort of issues do we have happening in this situation? Are there any problems with this as a piece of ethical research? Anyone like to speak instead of typing? If you feel confident, then please unmute your mic and make a comment to me. You're all so quiet. Great, Moldia. Again, thank you. The notion that this is potentially harmful to people because, yes, as Mira said, it's about imposing participation. And one of the essential components of ethical research is that it's voluntary. So we'll come back and have a look at this. All right, so let me move on. We're talking then, as we said right back at the beginning, about research being ethics being some sort of a code that guide the way we conduct research. And there are sometimes my slides are not moving on very fast. There are 4 fundamental principles that are associated with ethical research. And these are the sorts of things that you have just been picking up in those scenarios we've looked at. So there's the concept of respect and autonomy. There's the notion of beneficence. And the next one I always hate pronouncing, it's non-maleficence. If you think of the Disney program, the film in recent years where the main character has a very similar name, and that's quite notable, and the concept of justice. So when we talk about respect, we're talking about to what extent do people have the ability to autonomously, to individually make decisions whether they will decide to join in the research or not. Now, in the case we've just looked at, where the school director was going to nominate people to participate, we can see that this is a breach of that autonomy, that somebody else is trying to make decisions on behalf of the participants or volunteers. So they're not actually volunteers anymore. They're being forced or pressured. And we say that they're being placed under duress that they participate. So associated with this notion about whether people can autonomously make decisions, links to notions about power. Does the researcher have any power over people that could force them into compliance, into participation in the research? Are there particular vulnerable participants or populations that need additional care to make sure that power is not used over them? And how does this relate to particular communities? So it's not the same worldwide, internationally, all over, that people are equal and the same. So when we talk about respect for persons, we also have to think about our awareness of local cultural norms. When we're talking about beneficence, we're talking about the researcher having responsibility to care for the well-being of the participants. So this is, if you like, there's a coin here with two sides. So on one side, we have beneficence, and that is ensuring that the researcher looks after not just the physical well-being, but the mental and social well-being. And this is where in medical science, the focus is often very much on the physical well-being. In the social sciences, we really need to consider things about how could this research impact on people's social well-being, how about their professional reputation, about their employment status. So there could be a whole range of other social variables that could either benefit or, in fact, cause malevolence to people. So the other side of this coin, as I said, is ensuring that the research is non-maleficent, and that is that there is no harm that will be done to anyone who participates in the research, that any potential risks are kept to an absolute minimum. And this is really one of the most important aspects of ethics in research. Do no harm to anyone. And the final principle is around the meaning of justice. So some of this will become clearer when I give you some examples of the way these ethical principles have been breached in the past. But the notion of justice means that there is some equal distribution of both the benefits and the risks to any participants in the research. Now, in the past, often research was done on vulnerable groups to produce outcomes primarily for well-off or wealthy groups of people, people that could afford to pay treatment. And of course, this is seen as being unjust because the most vulnerable are being put at risk in order to provide knowledge for the privileged and the wealthy. So in the area of research ethics, the understandings about how to do research ethically has evolved over time. And it was driven originally by a lot of medical and biomedical research, but increasingly there are risks being identified in psychological and social science research. So let me talk to you a little bit about some of the unethical research that's been undertaken in the past, which is really quite shocking, quite horrifying. So on the screen, you'll see that there's some images that are related to two particularly significant pieces of research. The first one, where the faces are blanked out, is from the Tuskegee syphilis study, which was a study that took place in the US from 1932 right up until 1972. And this is what I find particularly shocking, is that this research was being undertaken up until relatively recent times. Sorry, I'm still trying to move things around my screen. So in the Tuskegee study, a syphilis study, African-American men were not given treatment that was actually available to improve and resolve their condition. Basically, they were a study to see how people suffered without treatment, what were the stages of this disease. And so they were placed in great harm because they were not given treatment which was available. The second photographic image shows you again something from the 1970s, which is Stanley Milgram's electric shock experiment. Now, the diagram that I've got down the bottom shows you what was happened. This was a study that wanted to look at the effect of power over people, and it followed on from a lot of concern about what had taken place during the World War, where people who were considered to be otherwise good people became perpetrators of torture against other people. And so the study was set up so that it was a deception, and a person came in order to do a task, which was to answer some questions. And that person, you can see, is the one that's in the green on my screen. The green, they're in a sort of separate room, and they are pressing buzzers. Now, that person actually wasn't a research participant. That person was actually an actor. And the real participant was the person in pink. Now, that person was being given instructions by the researcher, who is the person in S. They were portrayed to be the researcher, but in fact, they were also an actor and somebody wearing sort of a white laboratory coat to try and show power and authority. And every time the actor with the green jumper was believed to get something wrong, then the real subject of the experiment was supposed to give an electric shock. And as the person, the actor, got the things wrong or pretended to get things wrong, they were given higher and higher electric shocks. And when the participants started to say things like, no, we don't want to do that, then the, again, fake researcher would try and pressure them and tell them that, yes, they really needed to do this and this was important and that they were advancing knowledge. And so what happened was people continued to go on believing that they were actually giving shocks that were causing enormous harm to people. So in this case, if you had gone into a study thinking that you were just going to be, you know, answering a few questions, or that you were just going to be participating in a harmless study, and you came out knowing that you were capable of causing enormous pain and suffering to somebody, then that is going to have significant impact on you as a person. It would cause you harm, and in this day and age, this would not be considered to be an acceptable risk. So this research would be considered unethical. It also builds on the notion of ethics, all the things that happened during war in terms of experimentation in prisoner of war camps. And there were numerous other studies in the 50s conducted by the CIA, where people were administered LSD, mind-altering drugs. And from 1950s to 1980, there was also research that was done on children with disabilities that was, again, infecting them with hepatitis to see what happened to them. I find it quite impossible to understand that these could ever have been considered ethical, and yet they were. So, as a result of this unethical research, there were a range of internationally charters and development of rules that have shaped ethics as we know it. So after the First World War, there was the Nuremberg Code, which required the introduction of voluntary consent to participate in research. It introduced the idea that research must be for the good of people, that there shouldn't be unnecessary suffering, maleficence. It shouldn't be conducted if there was any likelihood of death, that there had to be some value, and very significant value, humanitarian value, if there was to be any sort of pain or suffering, and participants must be able to withdraw. Now, when we went on to the Declaration of Helsinki in 1964, there was addition of things such as the well-being of the subject should take precedence, that even if this has potential to produce new knowledge, the well-being of the subject should be the most important thing. It also enforced the notion that consent had to be in writing. It wasn't enough just to tell people and ask, are you happy with it? But there needed to be some evidence of this. And there was the introduction of caution around power issues over participants. So going on, there were other reports from the US Belmont report in 1978, which then led to a US national code. Now, these are international. In Nazarbayev University, we're strongly influenced by a lot of the US principles around ethical research. However, we would like to see the development of a more appropriate set of codes of conduct that really take into account the local community. So I'll get to that in just a minute. So at Nazarbayev University, if you wish to do research, then research has to be approved as a student by the Graduate School of Education Ethics Committee, or the Institutional Research Ethics Committee, which I'm currently the chair of. And in both of these cases, our prime concern is the protection of participants at all time. Now, Kira, and we actually have the Secretariat for Kira here with us in the seminar today, Yeldos Nilanov, because through Kira, working with the Graduate School of Education and working with the European Education Research Association, we're trying to develop a code of ethics which will work really well for Kazakhstan. Yeldos, would you like to just, we've only got a few minutes, but can you just say a couple of words about that work?
Thank you, Elaine. Good afternoon, colleagues. So KIRA is Kazakhstan Educational Research Association. It was established in 2014 by 14 local experts. One of them, and is our current president, is Dean of Nazarbayev University Graduate School of Education, Aida Sagentayeva. And association's purpose is promoting research, educational research in Kazakhstan, in our country, by creating some conditions and intensive. So nowadays we have two projects, two ongoing projects, and let me focus on one of them. Is development of ethical code for educational researchers. Um, this code will attempt to set some basic principles and norms for local researchers, taking account level of current practice and current legislation. So we're working on this document now, and in coming months, the code will be proposed for discussion with pedagogical universities. We have a consortium of 7 pedagogical universities, and we're with their collaboration, we're planning to prepare this document by September. Besides this project, we also have another project which calls improving the quality of initial teacher education in Kazakhstan, using stakeholder perspectives for innovation and research capacity building. By these projects, we want to collaborate with local universities within the framework of one project. Elaine is a principal investigator of this project. I think Elaine could explain it more than me. So we have a Kira website. I will share with you in the chat. So if you are interested in our activity, please contact me, Igor. We will be happy to answer and to collaborate with you if you're interested.
Thank you, Yildiz. So I'm aware that we've got fairly limited time. And so I really want to bring this together by saying at the Graduate School of Education, we really want our students to graduate with the skills and knowledge to be the best possible researchers. We think that this is such an important component of your master's degree or a doctorate, because being able to conduct well-designed ethical research ensures that you can produce knowledge. You can be a developer of knowledge, developer of understanding how education systems work, and particularly how we improve education systems and their related fields. And so in this way, by producing effective ethical researchers, we build the capacity for Kazakhstan to continue to grow, to explore new ideas, to make improvements to all aspects of life of people in the country, but also to contribute international knowledge that will inform understandings of people all around the world. So we aim to produce researchers that are humane, that have the concepts of integrity, that they are respectful for all human beings, that they show compassion with the people that they work with the communities that they wish to interact with, that they behave professionally, courteously, and sensitively. So, if I can pause there. Oh, sorry, I'll take you to my conclusions. My conclusions are that the foundation of all research must be ethical principles and practices. All scholarly work must be conducted with academic integrity, and all empirical research that using human subjects must be based on those basic principles. And those basic principles then transpire into a range of processes, particularly around the need for gaining informed consent from people and in the way that we manage the data that is obtained in order to minimize any identification of people and subsequent cause of harm. And so I guess we welcome you as future GSE students, future researchers in Kazakhstan, to help build this capacity and to help contribute to knowledge production. So can I hand over to perhaps you, Aidana? Would you like to?
Yes, sure, Elaine, I will take the questions. So the first question is Nazira asking about, can we have these presentations here? So if you are comfortable to sharing your presentation, Elaine, I can send it along with a webinar recording after the session.
I'm certainly happy to do that, and I'm happy to be available to be contacted by people. So if you share my my email address as well.
Okay, I will in the chat box.
Yep. There we are. I've got the chat box back now, so now I can see the conversations.
Cool. Any other questions, dear participants? We have a limited time, maybe 10 or 15 minutes.
I've just put my email address up there. So other than thank yous, are there any other observations you'd like? I'd really love to know what other information that you would be keen to know. This is a very short presentation. This material takes a lot longer to develop, and that's why it's part of our master's program and our PhD program.
There is a question from Nazira. Dear Elaine, what do you think about using state archive materials?
Yeah, I think that using existing data is a good source of research information. If you are using existing data, so that is archive materials that are available in the public domain and that anyone in the public is able to access, then you do not need to get consent from participant to use that data. That's one of the few cases. You are accessing data that already exists, so it's often referred to as secondary data. So that's not a problem to use that. That's okay, Nazira?
Yeah, let me see if I can switch Nazira's audio. Nazira, you can now speak up if you want to. Actually, all the participants can switch on their audios now. You're allowed to.
Okay, thank you, dear Elaine. It was very effective, useful webinar from your side. So my research theme was connected with archive materials, but now we are working with our professors how to use effective archive materials in our dissertation. So I just would like to know your opinion.
So is the archival material that can you tell me a little bit more about what sort of material you're trying to access? Is it documents, or is it data, is it photographs?
Yeah, we have photographs, documents too, but I just helping to my professor, but my research theme connected with historiography. I just interested to my professor.
Yeah. So when we're dealing with documents, then often we're doing some sort of a document analysis. Where we're trying to look at both the content and the language of that document. And often we use different forms of qualitative analysis with that. It might be thematic coding. And there is qualitative software data called NVivo which is terrific for working with photographs as well. You can include photographs and videos into this software to help with the coding process. So yeah, the question becomes, in terms of your methodology, what data are you collecting, and then how will you analyze that data? And if you are using photographic data, which is available in the public domain, it's historical, then it's usually okay to use that. You have to, of course, acknowledge the source where it's from, and you have to have the permission from the archival institution about accessing and using their data. Often they require you to seek special permission, and you have to sign particular agreements about what you will and you won't do with the data, and how you will recognize where it comes from. So I'm not sure whether that helps you, Nazira.
Yeah, thank you for your answer. I see your email address. So can I write there?
You can. I'm not sure whether I can help you much more, but you certainly can email me. That's fine.
Okay, thank you, Elaine. It was very effective to me.
You're most welcome. Thank you. So do we have any other questions? Any other information you would like about our courses, our programs, how we work with research in our programs, or how these processes are applied in the research of faculty?
For now, there is no other questions. Let's wait for some minutes. Yeah, it's easy to speak up rather than typing all the questions.
Yeah.
Any other questions, participants? If there will be no questions, we are ready to close our session.
Can I ask one question?
Yes, can you please speak more louder, Janat?
I am from West Kazakhstan Medical University, and we are planning to do research work using archive material. Exactly, we want to work with specimens, with slides. And should we take written agreement from patient? Because it is the archive material, some of patients already died.
So is it archival material? So is this material that somebody has already collected? And when the material was collected, who has ownership of that material?
Yeah.
And I guess when the material was collected, so if this is in the medical area, there's a number of things that are really quite important here. If you are getting access to existing medical data, then you should only be getting that data in a de-identified form. That is, if it's a hospital or if it's a laboratory, they should only be providing you with data that does not contain any identifying information. So that would be, it doesn't contain the name of the person, their address. It may contain some demographic data that is useful. You might need to know, depending on what it is you're studying, the person's age, the person's gender, but you should not be able to identify and trace that person from the archival information you get. So accessing any existing data of that nature, it must be de-identified before you have permission to use it.
Yeah, we want to use only, for us interesting, only age of patients and their sex. That's all. Their name for us not interesting.
Yeah. So if when you get that information from whoever you're getting it from, you actually need to ensure that they are only giving you de-identified data. And if you're getting it from an organization, you may need to again have some sort of a confidentiality agreement with them about what you're going to be doing with the data that they're giving you. But again, the big issue is here that you should not be able to identify those people and work out who they are. And I'll give you an example. Just recently at IREC, we had a request for someone to do some research, and they wanted to collect some demographic data. They wanted to collect the age of the person, the area they lived in, their position in the university, the faculty that they were from, their country of origin, and their gender. And by requesting that information, it actually made people identifiable. So for example, if I had answered that information, people could have worked out that it was me because I'm the only female professor in the Graduate School of Education that comes from Australia. So I would have been identifiable to people. And so that's a case where we had to say, no, you cannot do the proposed research the way that you are planning, because there is a problem with people being identified.
Yeah, I understood. Thank you for explanation. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any further questions? It's interesting knowing what sorts of things you might be doing. No? All right. Well, thank you very much for your participation today. And please do make contact with Kira for more information about the development of Kazakhstan's National Code of Research Ethics in Education. Please contact us or come along to one of our winter or summer schools where we do additional work on research design and ethics in research. Idana, there's a question about how the recording is accessible.
So I will send the recording to the participants who did registration on our website. Let me type this website here. So most of them get the link from there. If you go and register at this link, open a new edu.kz/GSE. Before, like, let's say 5 p.m. I will send during the evening all the materials along with the presentation that Elaine will be sharing with me and the video recording.
Great.